It all started with one small decision, one tiny action, and everything changed. A darkness, where nothing was as it seemed, where even friends began to look like enemies. If you think this is just the story of one life lost, you're mistaken. This isn't just a murder. It's a tale of hidden truths, where everyone faces the shadows within themselves. And today, you'll walk that same dark path. The letter arrived just as dusk began to bleed into the horizon, the dying light casting long, eerie shadows across the polished floor of the private compartment. Hercule Poirot, ever the meticulous observer, turned the envelope slowly in his hands, feeling the weight of urgency pressed into every curve of the thick, cream-colored paper. The ink, dark blue and rich, seemed to carry the tension of the writer's trembling hand, unmistakably the handwriting of Lady Evelyn Ashcroft. She was a woman of immense poise and reputation, her correspondence always precise. But this was different. Monsieur Poirot, I beg you to come at once. I fear for my life. Something is terribly wrong within these walls. Whispers echo through empty corridors. Objects move when no one is near. And I feel watched always. I fear I am not alone in this house, even when I am. Poirot read the letter once more, his sharp eyes narrowing with an unsettling focus. The words rang with such distress. It would be folly not to take them seriously. Beside him, Captain Hastings, the ever-loyal companion, leaned forward, sensing the grave tone in Poirot's silence. Sounds quite dire, doesn't it? He muttered, his voice tinged with concern. Poirot did not respond immediately. Instead he tapped the letter gently against his palm. When a woman of Lady Evelyn's stature, known for her reason and composure, writes with such terror, Poirot said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge, it would be foolish to dismiss her. His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. The train journey to Ashcroft Manor was swift, but with every passing mile, the atmosphere seemed to grow thicker, laden with a quiet sense of foreboding. The mist that blanketed the landscape had an otherworldly quality, shrouding the world in a spectral silence. By the time the train pulled into the remote countryside station, the manor rose from the fog like a looming spectre, towering silent, and shrouded in a heaviness that pressed against the soul. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, as if the very earth itself held its breath. A young maid greeted them at the doors, her face pale, eyes red from crying, her voice barely a whisper, as though the words themselves were heavy with some terrible truth. You are too late, Madame Evelyn. She is dead. Hastings, ever the skeptic, drew a sharp breath, his face filled with disbelief. But Poirot remained unnervingly calm, his expression unreadable. Dead? He asked quietly, though the weight of the word seemed to hang in the air like a pall. Murdered, the maid replied, her voice quaking. In her study, the door was locked from the inside. Poirot's gaze shifted to Hastings, and for the briefest moment, a flicker of something darker passed through his eyes. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. The study itself was a room frozen in time, untouched by the outside world. Books stood undisturbed on their shelves, their leather spines faded with age, the scent of lavender still lingering in the air, a final vestige of the life that had once filled the space. And yet, it was far from tranquil. At the center of the room, Lady Evelyn's lifeless body lay sprawled on the rug, her once regal posture now broken, her delicate hand curled tightly around something. Poirot crouched down, his sharp eyes scanning every detail with a precision that was almost unnerving. There, in her grasp was a crumpled playing card, the Queen of Spades. Hastings looked on, his brow furrowed with confusion. A message? He asked, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his growing unease. Poirot did not answer immediately. His gaze fell upon a single bloody footprint near the door, its placement odd, as if someone had moved in haste, yet with deliberate intent. His eyes then moved to the window, which was partially open, letting in the frigid evening air. It was a strange thing, for the house was otherwise untouched by any draught. Before Poirot could delve deeper into his observations, a voice suddenly cut through the stillness. Monsieur Poirot, I saw the killer. It was the butler, standing in the doorway, his face ashen, his hands trembling with terror. A man, in a dark hat, with a red scarf. He stood over her, and then, he vanished. Just like that. Vanished into thin air. Hastings stepped forward, a mixture of disbelief and frustration in his tone. But the door was locked. How did he escape? The butler's face crumpled in anguish, his voice shaking. I don't know. I swear on my life. I saw him. I did. Poirot regarded the man with the calm detachment of one who had seen too many lies and too many truths. You remember his garments, but not his face? Poirot asked, his voice quiet, probing. The butler hesitated, his confusion palpable. No, I cannot recall his face, only the red scarf, the dark hat. Poirot's brow furrowed slightly, as though a thought was just out of reach. A man remembered only by the red he wore, and the void where his face should be. He turned to Hastings, his voice now lowering to a whisper. This is no ordinary crime, mon ami. We do not merely pursue a murderer, but perhaps a ghost, cloaked in flesh. Poirot moved silently through the study, his every step measured, his sharp eyes absorbing every minute detail. The subtle disarray spoke volumes. A book slightly out of place, a half-burned candle still clinging to its wick, a faint scent of cigar smoke, something that clearly did not belong to the lady. Each clue seemed to whisper its own story, leading him down a path that would surely reveal more than anyone had anticipated. But beneath it all, one truth pulsed steadily. Someone within this house had orchestrated a perfect illusion, manipulating the very fabric of reality to conceal their crime. And Poirot knew one thing for certain. The killer had not vanished into thin air. No, the killer had hidden in plain sight, and only he could uncover the elusive specter of their presence. As Poirot stood in the middle of the room, his sharp eyes scanning every detail, something felt off. But it wasn't just the eerie silence that gripped the atmosphere. It was the subtle, almost imperceptible clues that whispered the truth. Hastings followed his gaze, as it dropped to the floor where a single blood-stained footprint marred the polished wood. The print was unmistakable, clear, deliberate, yet its isolation stood out like an enigma. No others followed it, no path leading away. A man arrives, Poirot muttered, his voice cool but laced with an eerie certainty. And then he vanishes. Hastings frowned, mulling over the possibility of a panicked accidental slip by the murderer. Perhaps they'd stepped in the blood, and wiped their shoes clean afterward. Poirot, however, offered no such comfort. His eyes narrowed, and his fingers drifted lightly along the windowsill, brushing off a small remnant of cigar ash. Lady Elena did not smoke, he noted, turning the ash between his fingers. Hastings' brow furrowed. Someone was here before the murder then? Poirot's lips twisted in the smallest of smiles, and his voice lowered to a near whisper. Or perhaps after. These clues, Hastings, are not cries for attention. They whisper in the dark, waiting for a careful listener to unravel them. His words lingered in the room, unsettling and cryptic. Hastings turned toward the heavy oak door, locked from the inside. Could it have been a suicide? Poirot shook his head slowly. Mon ami, observe Lady Elena's body. He gestured to the scene. It faces her attacker, the Queen of Spades clutched too tightly in her grasp. A woman who ends her life would not hold it with such desperation. His hand shifted to the fireplace poker beside the hearth. This, Poirot picked it up, seems too convenient. A weapon, left behind, an explanation for an accident. But see, there's no blood, no sign of struggle, no evidence. It's been placed here, deliberately to mislead. Hastings let out a heavy sigh, frustration mixing with confusion. But how did the murderer escape? Poirot's fingers drummed against the edge of the desk, his mind piecing together the puzzle. A locked room, an apparent impossibility, he murmured. But we know better, don't we, Hastings? Nothing is truly impossible. The answer, though elusive, is waiting to be uncovered. His gaze swept the room once more, his sharp eyes catching every nuance. Something was missing, something unseen. His mind was already assembling the final pieces, when he turned to the trembling butler by the door. You said you saw a man fleeing? Po's tone was gentle yet piercing. The butler swallowed hard, nodding. Yes. A dark hat. A red scarf. His words faltered, his eyes wide. But his face, I don't remember. Silence filled the room. Hastings, perplexed, asked, "But you saw him clearly, didn't you?" The butler nodded frantically. "Yes, I saw him, but his face, it's like it was never there. It's gone, vanishing from my mind." Poo stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a hint of something much deeper than curiosity. "A man without a face, or a face never seen," he murmured, a shiver running through the room. He turned to Hastings, his voice soft yet filled with the weight of revelation. "Mon ami, we're not chasing a man, we are hunting a ghost." The words hung in the air like a cold unspoken truth. Chapter 2 began to unfold. As Poo entered the grand drawing room of Hawthorne House, the gathered family and staff sat in tense silence, their grief palpable, but interwoven with something darker, something hidden. Richard Hawthorne, the elder son, stood rigid by the fireplace, his jaw clenched, eyes hard. Alfred, the younger brother, fidgeted in his seat, ink-stained fingers betraying his nervousness. Miss Turner, the maid, wrung her hands with anxiety, while Miss Davenport, the composed friend of Lady Helena, observed quietly, her gaze fixed on Poo with polite yet curious interest. Poo, unfazed, folded his hands with precise care. "Madame," he began, his voice calm but commanding, "tell me, who among you saw or heard anything unusual last night?" A heavy silence fell, thick as fog. Richard exhaled sharply, his posture unyielding. "I saw nothing. I retired early," he said, voice curt. Poo turned his gaze to Alfred. "And you, Monsieur Alfred?" Alfred hesitated, his words stumbling over each other. "I was in my study. I didn't leave my room." Poo's gaze shifted to Miss Turner. Her anxiety was palpable, as she spoke in a barely audible voice. "I was setting the tea things. I heard a sound, but I thought it was the wind." Poo's gaze sharpened. "A sound?" he inquired, his tone keen, like a predator honing in on its prey. Miss Turner nodded hesitantly. "Yes, just a sound, but I thought it was nothing." Yet Poo knew better. The truth was slipping through the cracks, and he was on the verge of uncovering something that would shake them all to the core. The room seemed to hold its breath as Poo, ever the master of quiet observation, continued to examine the intricacies of the scene before him. His gaze moved from the butler, still trembling, to the other faces gathered in the drawing room, each of them pretending to wear the mask of grief. Yet Poo could sense the subtle undercurrent of something darker. The butler had seen the man, or had he? His description was so vivid, yet Poo's instincts whispered that there was more to the story than met the eye. The elusive figure, clad in a dark hat and red scarf, had fled into the night, but the impossible part remained. No one had truly seen him. It was as though he had been swallowed by the very shadows, a ghost passing through the walls. Poo's mind ticked over this new puzzle, piecing the clues together, his fingers lightly tapping against the polished wood of the desk. As the conversation shifted, an officer from the local constabulary entered, his bulky frame casting a shadow across the room. The news was grim. A man matching the butler's description had been seen boarding a train to London, but the records didn't add up. No ticket, no memory of him on board, as if he had vanished into thin air. Poo's sharp eyes narrowed. "A man who is seen, but not seen," he murmured softly, the words falling heavy in the silence that followed. His gaze locked onto the butler, whose nervousness was palpable, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Poo held up a newspaper, asking the butler to read aloud, but the man's struggle to focus on the words revealed more than he intended. "How could you describe a man in such detail?" Poo asked calmly, yet failed to distinguish something as simple as the color of a tie from across the room. The butler faltered, his face paling, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. Poo's mind was racing, the pieces of the puzzle, shifting and sliding into place. But the truth still eluded him. Something was deeply wrong here, not just with the crime, but with the very fabric of reality the witnesses had woven around them. The butler, a man who had seen the impossible, could not even trust his own eyes. Poo's voice was low, contemplative. "This case, Hastings, It is not simply about identifying the culprit. It is about what was never there to begin with. His gaze moved to the fireplace, where the remnants of a burned piece of parchment caught his eye. He knelt, carefully retrieving the fragment, the ink barely legible, but one phrase stood out amidst the charred edges. Must be repaid in full £50,000. Hastings glanced over, stunned by the revelation. Good heavens, Poirot, that's a considerable sum, he exclaimed, his mind racing with the implications. Poirot's fingers traced the edges of the paper, noting the damp patches and the hastily burned edges. Someone tried to destroy this in a hurry, he muttered, his thoughts working through the layers of the mystery. But why? Hastings, ever eager to offer an explanation, spoke up. It's clear, isn't it? Lady Helena was in debt, desperate enough to take extreme measures. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him before he could finish. No, Hastings. Look closer. Poirot's voice was laced with the quiet authority of a man who had seen the hidden truths others missed. There was more to this than a simple debt. The truth was just beginning to reveal itself, layer by layer, and it was far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. The man in the red scarf, the vanished ghost, was part of a much larger game, one that was being played with stakes far higher than they could have imagined. Poirot's fingers gently traced the ink on the burnt paper, his eyes sharp and calculating. The writing, bold and heavy, did not belong to a woman afraid of losing wealth. The faint remnants of the letter were far too deliberate, the kind of effort that suggested it was meant to be concealed by someone other than Lady Helena herself. The sum inscribed, £50,000, was no trivial amount. A debt that could drive anyone to desperate measures, Poirot murmured thoughtfully, his gaze never leaving the letter. Hastings, his brow furrowed, ventured a grim question. You think this led to murder? Poirot didn't immediately answer. Instead he folded the paper carefully and slid it into his pocket, his mind already turning over the implications. Money, Hastings, is often the root of desperate acts, he said softly, and desperation runs deep in this house. He moved toward Lady Helena's dressing table, its pristine surface betraying no sign of disorder. In the center, a velvet-lined jewelry box sat undisturbed, its golden clasp glinting in the dim light. With delicate precision, Poirot opened the box to reveal a collection of rings, brooches, and necklaces, each piece carefully arranged. Poirot nodded to himself, his mind already piecing together the details. You see, Hastings, he asked. Hastings rubbed his chin, bewildered. What exactly am I looking at? Poirot gestured to the untouched jewels. Lady Helena was a woman of considerable wealth. If this had been a robbery, surely these would be gone by now. Hastings' eyes widened. So robbery wasn't the motive. Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. Precisely, he said, shutting the box with a soft click. Yet someone wanted us to believe otherwise. The disarray, the body left behind, the supposed intruder vanishing into the night. It all points to a carefully crafted illusion, meant to mislead. Hastings sighed. Then we're left with something far more dangerous than theft. Poirot's smile faded, and his tone grew quieter. Ah, Hastings, theft is simple, but murder is always personal. The air in Hawthorne House was thick with unspoken grudges, the kind that clung to the walls like cobwebs. Poirot moved through the house, as if reading a book whose pages had been left open, but the characters within seemed reluctant to share their secrets. Richard Hawthorne, his posture stiff and his arms crossed, spoke first, his voice tinged with frustration. I assume you want to ask about my mother's finances, he said. We argued. She was reckless. I wanted to protect the family estate. Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. Protection and control, Richard, are not the same thing, are they? Richard's jaw tightened. I resented her decisions, but I didn't kill her. Poirot turned away, seemingly satisfied with the exchange, but his gaze lingered briefly on Miss Davenport, who stood near the window, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. Poirot studied her with sharp eyes. I wonder, madame, he mused, why do you seem so eager to aid in this investigation? Miss Davenport smiled, but there was something too practiced in her expression. Is it wrong to want justice, monsieur? She replied, her voice smooth and measured. Poirot's gaze never wavered. Not at all, he said. But I find that those most eager to help often have the most to hide. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken meaning. Poirot turned his attention to the gardener's shed, an unassuming structure tucked away at the rear of the estate. The two men walked in silence, the tension between them palpable, until they arrived at the shed. Poirot's eyes quickly found what he was looking for. A red scarf, carelessly draped over a rake, the same one the butler had described as part of the fleeing intruder's attire. Hastings frowned. The butler's story matches, but how did it end up here? Poirot carefully lifted the scarf, inspecting its fabric with a frown. The question is not how, Hastings, he said softly, but why? Why would someone want us to believe this belonged to the murderer, only to leave it here in plain sight? Hastings hesitated. A trap. Poirot's lips curled into a small smile. An excellent trap, my friend. A trap meant for us. The mystery deepened, the web of deception growing ever more tangled. Poirot turned back to the butler, who stood trembling at the threshold of the study. You saw the man clearly, didn't you? Poirot's voice was calm but piercing. The butler nodded, his face pale and drawn. Yes, monsieur. I saw him. I did. Poirot leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. And yet you recall his clothing so vividly, yet cannot even recall the color of the tie across the room. The butler faltered, his hands trembling. Poirot's eyes never left him. Your memory, Muir, is unreliable at best, and you are not the only one with secrets to hide. The tension in the room was unbearable, the silence stretching out like an eternity. The truth was close, so close, but still hidden beneath layers of lies and deceit, waiting to be uncovered. Poirot's eyes, sharp as ever, fixed on the butler Muir, his gaze penetrating the very air around them. The room felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were closing in, reflecting the mounting tension. Muir, standing rigid in front of him, shifted under the weight of Pugh's scrutiny. A fleeting glance at the man's eyes, those eyes that refused to meet his, was enough to set Pugh's instincts ablaze. There was something wrong, something buried deep beneath the butler's words, an unsettled flicker, a detail that could not be dismissed. The moment Muir had spoken of a face obscured by shadows, Poirot had known something was amiss. Faces, especially those of suspects or witnesses, never faded from memory, unless they were intentionally erased. Muir, Poirot said, his voice low, almost soft, as he leaned in just a fraction closer, his presence commanding. Tell me, are you absolutely certain you saw him flee, or did you perhaps see him vanish? The words seemed to linger in the air like smoke, curling around them, pushing Muir further into discomfort. The butler's breath caught, his hands twitched, and with a subtle step back, his face drained of what little color it had retained. The flicker of uncertainty, now unmistakable, danced behind his eyes, a hesitation Pugh's had not seen before. Poirot did not break his gaze. He continued to probe, his voice now sharper, more insistent. You were standing there watching him, but you cannot recall the most crucial detail. His face. Why? The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with the weight of the question. Muir's hands clenched into fists, his pale knuckles betraying his unease. Poirot watched every movement closely, as the butler stumbled over his words. The tension in the room stretched like an invisible wire, pulling tighter with each passing second, as if the entire house were holding its breath, waiting for Muir to crack under the weight of the truth. Just then, the creak of the door echoed through the silence, and an elderly woman entered the room, her frail form supported only by a cane. Her face, lined with age and wisdom, held both confusion and conviction, an unyielding belief in what she thought she had seen. Her presence only added to the mounting sense of unease that clung to the air. I saw him, she declared, her voice trembling but resolute, as if her words alone could make the truth undeniable. The man, I saw him standing there by the window, just before the lady. Her sentence trailed off, her hands gripping the edge of a chair for support, her voice faltering. Poirot studied her intently, every nuance of her expression, the trembling of her hands, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. He could feel the unspoken struggle beneath her words, the confusion that twisted the edges of her recollection. "Please, madame, take your time," he urged, his voice gentle yet insistent, drawing her out, waiting for the cracks in her memory to reveal themselves. "You are certain of this? You saw him clearly?" The woman hesitated, her brow furrowing as if her thoughts were trapped in a fog. "Yes, no," she stammered, struggling to grasp the details.
"It's strange."
"I can't remember clearly, but the scarf, the red scarf." Her words trailed off, as her gaze flickered to the floor, as if searching for something she couldn't quite find. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, his suspicions growing stronger. "Ah," he murmured, "the red scarf." He stepped closer, studying her with a sharp, calculating gaze. "But tell me, madame, how is it that you remember the red scarf so vividly, yet the man's face slips from your mind entirely?" The woman hesitated, confusion clouding her features. Her hands, wringing the fabric of her shawl, were now visibly trembling. "I don't know," she whispered. "It's as though his face was veiled, hidden. I cannot see it, not clearly. It's like a shadow." Poirot's expression darkened, but his voice remained calm, tinged with an undertone of skepticism. "Strange indeed," he muttered. "You are a woman of integrity, madame, yet your mind falters when asked for specifics. You remember the scarf, but not the face." The woman's eyes darted nervously, her mind grappling with something she couldn't fully comprehend. Poirot turned to Hastings, his tone now carrying the weight of his growing doubts. "Mon ami," he said quietly, "this witness may have seen something, but whether it is the truth, or merely a reflection of her confused mind, is yet to be determined." Hastings, who had been standing silently at Poirot's side, nodded but said nothing. The pieces were falling into place for Poirot, but there was still something intangible, something elusive, that clung to the mystery. He turned away, returning to the study, his mind racing. As he crossed the room, a strange scent caught his attention. Lavender. A scent that could soothe the nerves, calm the mind, but there was something off about it. It was heavier, more pervasive, not quite right. His eyes scanned the room quickly, resting on a small bottle of perfume, discarded on the vanity. But that wasn't it. No, this fragrance felt deliberate, as if someone had introduced it into the air with purpose, with the intent to cloud the senses, to manipulate perception. Hastings, trailing closely behind, scrunched his nose. "Do you smell that?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind already working, connecting the dots. "Lavender," he said softly. "A soothing scent, yes, but in large quantities, it can dull the senses, cloud one's mind, it can induce a state of confusion. After all, what better way to manipulate the truth than to alter perception?" Hastings frowned, clearly disturbed by the implication. "You think she was drugged?" Poirot turned toward the window, inspecting the area, with a practiced eye. "It's possible, Hastings," he murmured. "A hallucinogen, perhaps, or a sedative. Something designed to disorient, to make the witness question what she truly saw." He walked over to the desk, his eyes narrowing, as he noticed something gleaming on the floor beneath it. A small shard of glass. He crouched down, retrieving it with delicate precision. "This," Poirot said, turning the shard over in his fingers, "is not an accident. It's deliberate. And more importantly, it is part of a mirror." Hastings leaned in to examine it. "A mirror," he echoed, his voice puzzled. "But there's no mirror in this room, Poirot." Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of discovery, as the last piece of the puzzle began to slide into place. "No," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "there is not. But someone has broken it deliberately. A mirror designed to distort, to deceive. And now, we have the beginning of our truth. Poirot stood still, his mind already unraveling the implications of what he had uncovered. He glanced at Hastings, his gaze sharp and intense, as a realization began to crystallize in his mind. Exactly, Hastings. A mirror once stood here, he murmured, his voice tinged with a quiet thrill. And now it's gone, removed with meticulous care, not a trace left behind. But why? To distort the truth, to shatter the clarity of reflection. Hastings, still processing, blinked in confusion. But why would anyone want to do that? Why create such a falsehood? Poirot's eyes gleamed with the excitement of the puzzle falling into place. Because, my friend, a reflection can be manipulated. A face can be hidden. A form can be obscured. Someone has gone to great lengths to conceal what truly happened here. Perhaps to bury the truth beneath layers of deception. Poirot straightened up, his gaze sweeping across the room, now feeling heavier with every passing second. What better way to fabricate an illusion than by removing all clarity, by erasing what was real, leaving only shadows and doubts behind? The truth, Hastings, lies in the smallest details, the ones that have been carefully hidden from us. The more I examine this place, the more I realize the extent of the deception. His voice dropped as he muttered to himself, lost in the spiraling web of connections. Hastings stood there, trying to grasp the magnitude of Poirot's words, but the detective was already moving again, his thoughts racing forward. There was one crucial piece left, the identity of the real witness. The elderly woman's testimony, once vital, now seemed increasingly unreliable. Poirot was determined to confront her again, to get to the heart of her wavering recollection. With a calm resolve, he approached her once more. "Madame," he asked gently, though the undercurrent of his suspicion was palpable. "You recall the man clearly, don't you?" Her eyes, clouded with uncertainty, flickered as she nodded. "Yes, I saw him standing by the window." His eyes, she trailed off, her voice quivering. Poirot's interest piqued. His eyes. "What do you mean by that?" The woman hesitated, struggling to express what unsettled her. They were empty, like there was nothing inside. "No emotion, no life," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Poirot's mind spun at her words. Empty eyes, madame, a face that seemed absent, not truly present. The woman nodded, her voice shaking with the weight of her own confusion. He was there, but not really there, as if he was just filling the space. A shadow, but not real. Poirot leaned back, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on his lips, a flicker of understanding lighting in his eyes. A man with empty eyes, a reflection perhaps, something, or someone, that isn't truly there, but is merely an illusion, an image designed to deceive. He turned to Hastings, his voice steady, yet filled with excitement. "Hastings, do you remember what we found earlier? The red scarf, the shard of the broken mirror, and now, this witness who describes a man she cannot fully see, a figure with no face, no identity, no substance. What are we chasing here, Hastings?" Hastings frowned, his mind struggling to piece it together. "An illusion, Poirot." Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile, his eyes gleaming. "Exactly. We are not chasing a man, Hastings. We are chasing an illusion, a constructed reality, designed to mislead us, a figment, crafted to distort the truth." Poirot turned away, his gaze falling upon Lady Eleanor's desk, where he had earlier found the hidden leather-bound diary. He reached for it again, the delicate pages creaking under his fingertips as he began to leaf through it. Hastings stepped closer, his eyes scanning over the hastily scrawled pages. "Looks like nothing more than ramblings, Poirot. Just scribbles." Poirot paused, his fingers hovering over a particularly disordered section. "Ah, Hastings, it is precisely in chaos that the truth often hides. These are not the scattered thoughts of a woman lost to madness. There is a rhythm to this disorder, a pattern, buried beneath the noise." Hastings raised an eyebrow, still skeptical. "Patterns in scribbles. I don't follow." Poirot smiled, a glimmer of satisfaction flickering across his face. Each page holds fragments, words repeated in strange sequences, messages disguised, perhaps, a secret hidden in plain sight. Hastings took a step back, considering. You think it's a code? Poirot shook his head, his eyes narrowing in concentration. No, mon ami. Not a code. Something more elusive. A way of writing, of recording, that could only be understood by someone who knew how to read between the lines. If Lady Eleanor had a secret, this may very well be her attempt to preserve it, to hide it from prying eyes. He closed the diary, a frown tugging at his features. But the question remains, was she hiding it from herself or from someone else? Poirot's investigation took him back to the Hawthorne family. Richard Hawthorne, the elder son, had been an enigma from the start. Quiet, distant, his demeanor shadowed by some hidden burden. Poirot had noted the subtle signs, his unease, his reluctance to engage fully in the investigation. Late one evening, as Poirot pored over the evidence, the pieces of the puzzle began to align. Something in Richard's behavior, in his interactions, was off. Too guarded, too controlled. It was time to confront him. Poirot's eyes gleamed with the anticipation of unraveling the final threads, the last deception waiting to be exposed. The night was thick with shadows, as Poirot and Hastings stood motionless in the study, barely daring to breathe as the faint creak of the grand staircase reverberated through the silence. Poirot's sharp eyes darted toward the door, motioning for Hastings to follow without a word. With practiced stealth, they glided through the hall, their every movement calculated and hushed. The garden outside was shrouded in darkness, and there, under the dim glow of the distant moon, Richard Hawthorne slipped into view, his coat pulled tight around him, his steps deliberate yet hurried, betraying an urgency that seemed to cling to his every movement. Poirot's gaze never wavered, his brow furrowed with suspicion. "A late-night walk, Hastings," he whispered, his tone laced with intrigue. Hastings, his eyes narrowing, followed Poirot's lead, sensing the tension in the air. "It seems more like a desperate escape," Poirot muttered, his voice barely audible. "We'll follow him. The night, after all, holds many secrets, and I believe Richard Hawthorne is hiding one in its depths." As they moved in silence, Poirot's mind raced, piecing together fragments of his suspicions. Was Richard running from something, or was it the weight of guilt that made his pace quicken, as if each step was another inch toward his unraveling? Poirot didn't know, but he was certain of one thing. The truth lay somewhere in those shadows, and he would uncover it. The next day, as Poirot sat in his study, surrounded by scattered papers, and the weight of growing questions, his mind relentlessly danced from one clue to the next. His eyes kept flicking over the witness's statement, the one that had become the key to this tangled mystery. The elderly woman who spoke of a man in a red scarf. But something about her words didn't sit right. Poirot's eyes narrowed, as he stared at the jumbled mess of testimonies. "Hastings," he began, his voice filled with quiet realization. "It's not that her account is unreliable by chance. No. It's too perfect. It's deliberate. Someone has carefully shaped her perception, made sure she sees only what they want her to see." Hastings blinked, trying to follow Poirot's rapid deductions. "You mean someone's been playing with her mind?" he asked, voice tinged with disbelief. Poirot's gaze was unwavering, his eyes gleaming with the sharp edge of a revelation. "Precisely. She saw a man, a figure with no face, no defining features, just a phantom who fit perfectly into her warped perception. And the more I think about it, the clearer it becomes. This man, Hastings, he was never real. What we're chasing isn't a man. It's a ghost, an illusion, carefully constructed to lead us astray. And the woman, she's nothing more than a pawn in this grand deception." Hastings took a step back, his mind reeling from the implications. A ghost, but then who's pulling the strings? Poirot's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "That, Hastings, is the question we must answer next. The illusion is not just a trick of the eye. It's the key to everything. The investigation's labyrinthine twists continued, as Poirot and Hastings delved deeper into the Hawthorne estate, each layer revealing more questions than answers. Lady Eleanor's diary had seemed like a simple collection of disjointed thoughts at first, a jumble of words and scribbles. But Poirot's keen eye had caught something others might have missed, patterns hidden within the chaos, subtle rhythms that whispered of secrets buried in plain sight. "This is no ordinary rambling," Poirot murmured, his fingers gently turning the fragile pages. "These aren't just the scribblings of a confused mind. No, Hastings. This is something more. A message disguised in plain sight. A code perhaps. Or rather something even more sinister. A hidden record of a truth she could not, or would not, acknowledge." Hastings frowned, trying to make sense of the cryptic words before him. But why hide it like this? Why make it so difficult to understand? Poirot paused, pondering the question. Perhaps she wasn't hiding it from others, Hastings. Perhaps she was hiding it from herself. The more Poirot examined the cryptic entries, the more he was convinced the truth lay in the diary, buried beneath the surface, disguised by layers of confusion. As the investigation wore on, Poirot's attention turned back to Richard Hawthorne, whose distant behavior and anxious demeanor had never quite added up. One evening, Poirot and Hastings found themselves again following him, this time under the cover of night. They trailed Richard through the winding paths of the garden, watching as he slipped past the shadows, his movements betraying his nerves. "What is he hiding?" Poirot wondered aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Guilt? Fear? Or something far darker? Hastings could feel the tension building in the air as Poirot's mind churned with possible answers. But the pieces weren't fitting just yet, and Poirot knew the only way forward was to confront the illusion head-on. It was in the lies that Poirot would find his truth. Poirot stood motionless in the study, his eyes scanning the room with a precision only years of experience could bestow. The room, once a symbol of elegance and tranquility, now felt like a labyrinth of secrets. The disarray of the room, the locked door that had seemed so secure, and the odd positioning of Lady Eleanor's lifeless body, it all pointed to something far deeper, something more intricate than mere happenstance. There was a deliberate chaos to the scene, as though someone had gone out of their way to obscure the truth. Poirot's sharp eyes flicked across the furniture, taking in every detail, his fingers moving almost instinctively across the polished edges of the desk. As his hand brushed along the back, his fingers encountered something out of place, a small, almost imperceptible groove running along the side. It was so subtle that most would have missed it entirely, but not Poirot. "Hastings," he said, his voice soft but urgent, gesturing toward the desk with a quiet intensity. Hastings, who had been examining the room in his own way, stepped closer, a puzzled look on his face. "What is it?" he asked, leaning in to get a better view. Poirot's fingers found the groove again, pressing gently against the wood. With a faint click, a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a narrow passageway behind the desk, so cleverly concealed that it had likely never been seen by anyone else. Hastings inhaled sharply, his earlier confusion replaced by awe. "A hidden passage," he whispered, the weight of the discovery settling in. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "This is no ordinary desk, Hastings. It was designed to hide something, or someone." His voice lowered further, laden with the understanding of what this meant. The murderer didn't leave through the door. They fled through this secret route. Hastings took a step back, processing the revelation. "So the locked door was just part of the illusion," Poirot continued, his mind racing with thoughts. "The true escape route was hidden from view, known only to someone who understood the secrets of this room." Hastings' face paled as the implications sunk in. But why go to such lengths to hide it? What are they trying to cover up? Poirot didn't immediately answer, his gaze shifting to the shelves where a small bottle of herbal tonic rested innocuously. His instincts prickled, and he crossed the room with purpose, his eyes fixed on the bottle. The faint lavender scent that drifted from it seemed too deliberate, too familiar. He picked it up carefully, noting the simplicity of its design, too simple for something that might be important. Hastings, Poirot said, turning toward him with a raised brow. What do we know of Lady Elena's personal habits? Hastings frowned, clearly not expecting the question. She was always composed, never one for indulgences, he replied, trying to recall any detail that might tie the tonic to her. Poirot uncorked the bottle and took a cautious sniff. The lavender was unmistakable, but there was another note beneath it, a subtle undertone of something that wasn't quite right, something that hinted at a far more potent effect. This tonic, Poirot murmured, his voice thick with suspicion. It's not merely for calming the nerves. It hides something beneath the surface, a subtle blend that could influence the mind. Hastings stepped forward, his brow furrowing. You think she was drugged? Poirot's eyes gleamed with certainty. It's possible. The inconsistencies in the witness's testimony, the confusion surrounding her memories. It points to someone using this very tonic to manipulate Lady Elena's perception of reality. His fingers tightened around the bottle, a grim realization settling over him. Perhaps even to plant false memories. Hastings' mind whirred as he processed this. But if someone could manipulate Lady Elena's mind, what does that mean for the murder itself? Poirot's lips curved into a small but knowing smile. It means, Hastings, that we are dealing with something far more intricate than a simple murder. The murderer didn't just kill Lady Elena, they orchestrated an entire illusion, pulling the strings of perception to hide their true actions. The question now is not just who killed her, but who controlled the story of her death. Poirot placed the bottle back on the shelf, his thoughts swirling. But then something caught his eye, an envelope, delicately placed on the edge of the desk. He approached it slowly, a sense of foreboding washing over him. It was a letter, its edges crisp, the seal still intact. As Poirot broke the seal and read the contents, his eyes narrowed. He turned to Hastings, his expression now one of deep intrigue. Hastings, he began, his voice a shade colder. This letter is from Lady Elena's solicitor. It seems she had intended to change her will just days before her death. Hastings stepped forward, his interest piqued. A new will, who stood to gain from that? Poirot's eyes gleamed with understanding, but he did not immediately answer. That is the question, my friend, Poirot said, a small knowing smile tugging at his lips. Who stood to lose everything if Lady Elena's new will had been enacted? Who had the most to gain from her sudden and untimely death? Poirot's gaze lingered on the letter for a moment longer, his mind already working furiously to connect the dots. The murderer, he knew, was not just hiding in the shadows. They were playing a far more dangerous game. They had orchestrated the perfect crime, weaving deception and illusion with every step. And Poirot was the only one who could see through the lies. The game was on, and Poirot would not rest until the truth was laid bare for all to see. The murderer was hiding in plain sight, and Poirot was about to unmask them in the most unexpected way. The room was heavy with tension, each breath feeling like a moment suspended in time. Poirot stood silently, his gaze sharp as ever, taking in the assembled figures before him. Their faces were masks of carefully constructed innocence, but Poirot could see beyond the charade. The twisted web of lies, deception and greed woven over years of hidden relationships was now unraveling before his eyes. The timing of the sudden will change was no accident, no mere coincidence. It was deliberate, and it had cost Lady Elena her life. Her intentions, sealed in the quiet confines of her study, were never meant to be known. She had been silenced before the world could understand what she truly intended. Poirot's eyes flickered toward Hastings, the only one who seemed to grasp the weight of the moment. Someone, Poirot said, his voice low and laced with certainty. Someone here is hiding the truth, and I suspect that person is far closer than we realize. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, the room's atmosphere thickening with every passing second. He shifted his attention, now fixed on the butler, Muir, the ever-loyal servant whose testimony had been crucial in piecing together the events. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of unease, that unsettled Poirot. The inconsistencies were becoming glaring. It was time to push him. Muir, Poirot began, his tone calm but razor-sharp. Your statement. You were certain you saw an intruder flee the scene. Correct. Muir's eyes flickered nervously, his voice trembling slightly as he nodded. Yes, I saw him with my own eyes, he stammered. But Poirot wasn't buying it. He leaned in slightly, his gaze unyielding. And yet, Muir, you cannot recall his face. Isn't that strange? The butler's face reddened, his eyes shifting uncomfortably as he muttered. I don't know why, sir. It's all so confusing. Poirot took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, the weight of his words sinking into the butler's mind like a poison. You see, Muir, the more you doubt your memory, the more we must question what you truly saw. You were not just a passive observer in this scene. You were an unwilling participant. The butler's shoulders stiffened, his eyes wide. What do you mean? Poirot's gaze hardened. You were manipulated. Your mind was clouded, altered, and you were made to see what someone wanted you to see. Your testimony wasn't your own. It was planted in your mind. The butler recoiled, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. But I saw him. I swear I did. Poirot's voice softened, not in sympathy, but in understanding. And so you did. But the question, Muir, is why you saw him, and what you were meant to forget. With that, Poirot turned his back on the butler, the gears of his mind already shifting toward the next crucial piece of the puzzle. He moved swiftly toward the shattered mirror from earlier, its broken shards still scattered across the floor. The reflection had haunted him, and now standing before it, he understood its significance. Hastings, Poirot said, his voice steady, as he carefully examined the glass shards. The witness was not mistaken in her confusion. She didn't see a man before her. No, she saw an illusion, a carefully orchestrated deception designed to cloud her judgment. Hastings stepped forward, realization dawning on him. So she wasn't seeing reality at all. It was all a trick. Poirot nodded, his expression grim. Exactly. The figure was nothing more than a distorted reflection, crafted with precision to mislead her. The mirror was broken on purpose to ensure that the illusion would not be easily identified for what it truly was. He placed the shard back on the table with deliberate care, his fingers lingering on it for a moment before he turned toward Hastings. This was no simple crime. It was a carefully constructed narrative, a fiction woven into the very fabric of the scene. The murderer didn't just kill Lady Elena. They manipulated the entire environment to ensure the truth would be hidden. Hastings' voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of the discovery. So the real question is not just who killed her, but who constructed this elaborate web of lies. Poirot's gaze narrowed, his mind racing with the possibilities. Indeed, Hastings, and the answers are closer than we think. His eyes scanned the room, fixing on the faces of the gathered suspects. The time had come. Gather them, Hastings, Poirot said quietly, his voice steady and unwavering. It's time to reveal the truth, to lift the veil of deception that's clouded this entire case. Hastings nodded, a sense of urgency now in his every movement. Poirot stood still for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back, the gravity of the situation pressing in on him. The truth, Hastings, Poirot said softly, is always waiting to be uncovered. But some truths are harder to expose than others. As the suspects filed into the room, Poirot's eyes scanned them one by one, taking in every detail, every nervous shift. The final confrontation was at hand, and Poirot knew that the moment of revelation would come swiftly. The killer, hidden behind layers of deception, would be unmasked. But as the final pieces fell into place, Poirot couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the game was far from over. The truth was now within reach. But what would it reveal? Only time would tell. The tension in the grand drawing room was suffocating. Every breath hung heavy in the air, as Poirot stood at the center, his eyes scanning the faces of the assembled suspects. The faces he had studied for weeks, the ones that had danced in his mind with secrets, lies and half-truths. He could feel their eyes on him now, each of them sensing that the moment of reckoning had come. "The time has arrived," Poirot began, his voice cold and steady, slicing through the oppressive silence, "to expose what has been hidden, to lay bare the truth shrouded by deceit and manipulation. The lies that have poisoned this house will be unmasked." His gaze shifted, piercing through the room like a dagger, watching the subtle shifts in their expressions. Richard Hawthorne, the elder son, stood rigid, arms crossed, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Alfred, the younger, sat hunched in his chair, the nervous tapping of his fingers betraying his anxious composure. And Miss Davenport, ever the picture of calm, with her hands folded in her lap, appeared composed, but the slightest tightening of her lips betrayed her tension. "We've all heard the story," Poirot continued, his voice rising just enough to fill the room, "the tale of a man fleeing the scene, a shadowy figure seen by the butler, a phantom who vanished into the night. But what if I told you that man never existed?" A collective breath was held. Alfred's hand froze mid-tap, and even Miss Davenport's poise faltered as she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Poirot's gaze locked onto the butler, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "You saw a man, didn't you, Moore?" Poirot's voice was low, almost soothing, as he addressed the butler directly. "You saw him with your own eyes, a figure fleeing, a stranger in a red scarf. But what if I told you," Poirot's voice grew sharper, "that what you saw wasn't real?" Muir's face turned pale, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. "The butler did not lie, Hastings," Poirot said, his eyes now flicking toward his colleague, "but he was led to believe something that wasn't there. The figure he thought he saw wasn't a man at all. It was an illusion, a carefully crafted deception meant to manipulate his mind." The silence in the room deepened, thick and suffocating. Poirot stepped forward, his every movement deliberate, precise. "This illusion," he continued, "was not born of the butler's imagination. No, it was designed, orchestrated with intention. Someone here, someone among us, knew how to bend reality, to control perception." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "That person knew the power of suggestion, the power of the mind to see what it's told to see." Poirot's gaze lingered on Richard, then Alfred, and finally Miss Davenport, as if weighing them, testing their reactions. "And the illusion," he added, his voice now cutting through the thickening fog of uncertainty, "was built using a tool many of you overlooked, a simple mirror." Poirot nodded toward Hastings, signaling him to bring forward the small shard of glass he had found earlier. "This broken mirror in Lady Elena's study," Poirot said, "was not an accident. It was shattered deliberately. But more than that, it was used to manipulate the environment, to distort the truth." The room fell still, as Poirot placed the shard on the table with a soft clink, his eyes never leaving the group. "This mirror," he explained, "was positioned perfectly to reflect a figure, an illusion designed to make the butler believe he saw an intruder. The shadowy man in the red scarf wasn't standing in the room, he wasn't even outside. No, my friends, he existed only in the mirror's reflection, and in the butler's mind." The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended, as the suspects exchanged glances, their disbelief palpable. "But how?" Alfred stammered. "How could that be? How could we all have missed this?" Poirot turned toward him, his expression both patient and knowing. "The mind," he said, "is a powerful thing. It can be led, molded and shaped by the right hands. The figure you believed to be an intruder wasn't real, Alfred. The truth was hidden, buried in a perfect illusion." He turned back to the butler. "You weren't mistaken, Moore. You were manipulated. The person who set this in motion knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to make you see what they wanted you to see." The room was silent, the pieces of the puzzle slowly starting to fall into place. But there was still one more question left. "So who?" Poirot said, his voice now cutting through the room like a whip. "Who among you was behind this deception? Who wanted to create this illusion, to cloud the truth, and why? The room held its breath, the shadows of suspicion now creeping into every corner. The truth, it seemed, was within their grasp, but it had not yet been revealed. The tension in the drawing room was unbearable, a thick veil of suspense hanging over the gathered suspects. Poirot's voice, calm but piercing, cut through the air as he stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with quiet intensity. "It is time," he said softly, almost to himself, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. "The truth," he continued, "was not merely hidden, it was woven with deliberate intent, concealed in shadows, manipulated by forces far beyond mere deceit. The moment had come to unmask the one who had spun this web of illusions." His gaze swept over the room, lingering on each person as if weighing them against the backdrop of their lies. "We are all vulnerable to deception," he said, his tone thoughtful, "but sometimes, the mind itself betrays us, blinding us to the truth." He allowed a beat of silence to settle, watching as each individual processed the weight of his words. Hastings leaned forward, sensing that the unraveling of this mystery was close at hand, his eyes never leaving Pooh. The detective continued, his voice lowering, yet never losing its commanding presence. "We are all creatures of perception," he remarked. "Our minds are fragile, easily manipulated, and the truth, it often slips through our fingers, distorted, clouded, and twisted." He turned his attention to the butler, standing near the door, stiff and uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "You saw something, didn't you?" Poirot's voice was calm, measured. "But what exactly did you see? You speak of a man with a red scarf, a shadow moving in the night. But tell me, can you truly recall his face?" The butler, looking unnerved, shifted uncomfortably. I saw him. I swear, I saw him." But Poirot shook his head, his expression unreadable. "No more. You did see something, but it wasn't real. Your mind filled in the gaps, fed by suggestion, by expectation." He paused, letting the weight of his revelation settle. "The image of the man you claim to have seen was an illusion, one that you were made to believe." The butler's face drained of color, his confusion evident. "But I remember the scarf, the hat," he insisted, his voice growing frantic. Pooh smiled faintly. "Oh, yes. The scarf, the hat, those were the details your mind grasped onto. But the rest, that was the trick. The mind is a powerful thing, Muir. It can create visions where there are none, shape reality to match what it expects." Hastings, eyes widening, turned to Pooh, realization dawning. So, the butler wasn't lying. He was manipulated. His perception was altered. Pooh nodded slowly. "Precisely. And that illusion wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Someone with the knowledge to cloud the mind, crafted this false reality, leading us astray, making us believe in a fleeing intruder that never existed." The butler, defeated, slumped under the weight of the truth, his shame evident. Pooh's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You were deceived, Muir. But now the truth must come to light." He turned his attention to Miss Davenport, who had remained eerily calm throughout the exchange. "Ah, Miss Davenport," Pooh said, his voice smooth, almost admiring. "The puzzle is nearly complete. You've played your part well, but it's time to see the whole picture." Miss Davenport's lips tightened, her composure wavering for the first time. "What are you implying, Pooh?" she asked, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a flicker of fear. Pooh's gaze never wavered. The butler, the false clues, the confusion, all part of a carefully orchestrated ruse. The truth is far simpler, and yet far more devious. The murderer is not someone who worked in the shadows, but someone who knew exactly how to manipulate them. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. "The person who created this illusion, who clouded our judgment, was you, Miss Davenport." A gasp swept through the room. Miss Davenport's face drained of all color, her facade of calm disintegrating, as she struggled to maintain control. Pooh's voice remained calm, though there was an undeniable sharpness to it now. Yes, the murderer, the mastermind behind this entire ruse, is you. You used suggestion, manipulation, and deceit to cloud our minds, and lead us down a path of falsehoods. The truth was always here, hidden in plain sight. And now, Miss Davenport, it is time for you to face it. The room was thick with tension as Pooh's piercing gaze swept over the gathered guests, his voice cutting through the silence with cold precision. The pieces are now falling into place, my friends. It was never the intruder that we needed to fear, but the one who manipulated our very perception of the truth. His words hung in the air, a heavy fog of realization settling over the group. Lady Eleanor's death was no accident, nor was it the work of a stranger. It was the product of calculated deceit. Pooh's turned slowly toward Miss Davenport, her calm facade now shattered, revealing the crackling anxiety beneath. You, madame, he continued, were the architect of this illusion, the one who used every tool at your disposal to mislead us. The butler's false memories, the confused witness, the shattered mirror, all were carefully designed to misdirect us. Miss Davenport stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line, but Pooh's gaze never wavered. You knew, didn't you, that the lady's new will would cast you aside, leaving you with nothing. You were desperate, and in your desperation, you took matters into your own hands. A flicker of panic flashed in her eyes, but she quickly regained control, her voice steady as she protested. You're wrong. I would never. But Pooh's interrupted, his tone unwavering. You created a false scene, an intruder fleeing in the night, leaving behind nothing but confusion and suspicion. You used suggestion, manipulating the minds of those around you, to conceal your own guilt. He stepped closer, his words now cutting to the core. The clues were all there, hidden in plain sight, but you thought you could outwit us. The red scarf, the broken mirror, the strange scent that clouded the air, all were your doing, meant to obscure the truth, and lead us down a false path. Miss Davenport's composure began to crack as the realization dawned. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, her voice trembling, as the weight of her actions sank in. The room fell into an eerie silence, the crackling fire the only sound in the otherwise still air. Pooh stood unmoving, his expression unreadable. The door to the drawing room creaked open, and Inspector Guy stepped inside, followed by two officers. Pooh's yo gestured to Miss Davenport, his voice calm yet final. The game is over, madame. The truth has been revealed. Miss Davenport stood up, her hands shaking, eyes wide with panic. No, this can't be happening, she pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. I only wanted what was mine. The debts, the will, it was all too much. Her words faltered as the officers moved in, one gently placing a hand on her arm. Miss Davenport, you are under arrest for the murder of Lady Eleanor Hawthorne. The weight of her own guilt seemed to collapse upon her, and she looked up at Pooh with tear-filled eyes, the final vestiges of her composure slipping away. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she sobbed, her voice barely a whisper as she was led away. The room remained still, the truth finally laid bare. The room was heavy with the weight of defeat, Miss Davenport's figure a slumped silhouette, as she was led away by the officers, her face pale with the crushing reality of her actions. Pooh's her departure, his eyes hard and unblinking, as though the pieces of the case had finally settled into place. Yet something in the air felt unresolved. As the door clicked shut behind her, Pooh remained still, lost in thought, his gaze lingering on the dying embers of the fire. Hastings, who had been silent throughout the ordeal, finally spoke, his voice breaking the stillness. Pooh, it's done. The murderer is caught. The mystery solved. Pooh nodded slowly, but his expression remained unchanged, grave as ever. Yes, Hastings, the case is closed. But the real truth, he paused, his words measured, almost as if testing them on his own tongue. is that the most dangerous lies we face are not the ones others tell us, but the ones we tell ourselves. Hastings tilted his head, the weight of Pooh's words sinking in. That's unsettling, he murmured, brow furrowing, as if trying to unravel the deeper meaning. Pooh's eyes grew distant, his voice low and thoughtful as he continued. Miss Davenport believed she could control her fate by hiding the truth, weaving a web of lies to protect herself. But in the end, it was the lie that controlled her. Greed, fear, desperation. They make us believe we have control, when in reality, we're only slaves to our own deceit. A tense silence followed as Hastings processed the words. A long thoughtful pause before he spoke again. So what now? With the case closed, what's left to learn? Pooh's turned, his expression softening ever so slightly, but the sharpness in his eyes remained. What we must learn, Hastings, is that the lies we tell ourselves are often the hardest to untangle, and they are the ones that can destroy us most completely. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the room was filled with a different kind of heat now, a burning need to understand, to confront the lies we all tell ourselves. As Pooh glanced one final time at the door, he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, acknowledging the truth that was finally out in the open. The case is closed, but the mystery, the true mystery never really ends.